Karl Marx, A Life by Francis Wheen. Book review. So I've been interested in Marx for a long time, and I've been looking for a good biography. Just kind of a side note here. It's a bit difficult to find good biographies of Karl Marx. I mean, you can find them in the library, but if you go to a bookstore, there's not a lot of popular biographies, which I find puzzling because, he had a huge influence on 19th century and 20th century history. I mean, arguably not a good influence, or not an influence that's always been popular in America's heartland, but Hitler and Stalin haven't been good people either, and you can find plenty of biographies of them if you go to your local bookstore. I don't know, just a little thing to ponder. Why aren't there a lot more biographies of Marx? But you can find them if you go to the library, and I got this one from the library. And let me just talk about this book itself instead of the broader question. This book is highly readable. It serves as an excellent introduction to Marx's life. Francis Wheen is writing for the general public. It's an armchair book. And he has a good eye for picking out interesting anecdotes and generally kind of leaving out the boring stuff. Now, one of the interesting things about Marx is he lived during very interesting times, very revolutionary times, right? He was alive and in Europe during the revolutions of 1848. He was alive during the Paris Commune, and yet Marx himself never fought on a barricade. Wheen actually suggests that one of the reasons Marx was so prickly, why he got along so poorly with his fellow revolutionary exiles in London, is that Marx felt inadequate. All these other people had had genuine experiences out on the barricades fighting the revolution. Marx had done none of that, and that Wheen suggests is one of the reasons he was so quarrelsome with them, this sense of inadequacy. Now, it is true that in his younger days, Marx had a bit of an interesting life. He was expelled from several European countries. So he kind of got sent from one to the other. But then eventually he did settle in London, and then his travels were over. So there's no stories of revolutionary bravado to tell when you're telling a story about Marx. Instead, to make the story interesting, Wheen focuses on all the juicy Victorian gossip. For example, such as Marx's illegitimate child that he had with his housekeeper, or the time Karl Marx wrote a thoughtless condolence letter to Engels and almost ruined their friendship, or a duel that Marx fought back in his younger days, or some of the family squabbles. Marx used to squabble with his parents, and then later in life, when Marx became the parent, he had a lot of squabbles with his son-in-laws. So lots of interesting little tidbits about Marx's life are included. Wheen's writing style is very refreshing as well. He doesn't get bogged down in academic writing, and there's a lot of dry humor mixed into his prose. He's not above kind of poking a bit of fun at Marx. One of his favorite techniques is he'll bring up a letter from Marx, and he'll quote from it while making kind of ironic comments on the side. It's interesting reading. He also brings in pop culture, like occasionally he'll bring in Monty Python references to illustrate a point he's trying to make. Now, the book is meant to be an introduction to Marx, although occasionally Wheen will take digressions away from the narrative to correct false assumptions. So he is kind of assuming that the reader might already have assumptions about Marx. It's generally an easy read, although the sections that get into the philosophy, I had to take a little bit slower, really concentrate. I'm not much of a philosophy person. I was interested in kind of finding out more about Marx's life and his adventures. My brain isn't geared towards philosophy. But you can't get around it, huh? Like, you can't write a book about a major philosopher and completely ignore his philosophy. You can't say, oh, and by the way, he also published Das Kapital this year. Like, you have to get into it a little bit, and Wheen does. Wheen makes a lot of fun at Marx. Talks about Marx's tendency to write these long polemical tracts against his rival philosophers, usually kind of rival socialist philosophers, when he should have been doing more productive work, like advancing his own philosophy. Or Wheen pokes fun of his lifelong inability to get his finances in order. He couldn't make his finances balance even with a lot of support from Engels. So, I think Wheen points this out, the irony. Here is the author of Das Kapital, who can't even balance his own household budget. And Wheen has a lot of fun kind of making fun of how much of a procrastinator Marx was. It's funny when you think about it. Here's Karl Marx. Half of the population views him as this evil genius. Half of the population views him as like this revolutionary hero. But, this comes out in Wheen's book. What he was more than anything was just a terrible procrastinator. He just could not sit down and finish Das Kapital. The publishers had to get on his case about it. It's an interesting view of the man, different than what we usually picture as the more serious Karl Marx. But on the serious philosophical matters, Wheen is usually very sympathetic to Marx and seeks to rescue Marx from his critics. Now, my own history or bias in the leftist circles I frequented in my youth were more sympathetic to Bakunin. There was this famous split between Marx and Bakunin in the First International. So of interest to me was Wheen's account of the Marx-Bakunin rivalry. Wheen paints a very ugly picture of Bakunin. Bakunin being kind of the father of modern anarchism. It's very harsh and it's not what I'm used to hearing about Bakunin, because I'm used to reading about him from more kind of sympathetic sources. But yeah, it was interesting. Got me questioning what I thought I knew about Bakunin. All in all, a fascinating read. I'm not sure I agreed with every word in it, but very interesting, very readable. If you're looking for a good readable biography of Marx, check this one out. And you should. Considering how much influence Marx has had on the 20th century, we should be reading more about him. Yeah, so check this book out.